welcome to Heineken Rugby Weekly on the 42.ie. Every week we bring you behind the lines with expert analysis, tactical insights and engaging conversation around the international and club season. Our expert analysts will ask the hard questions and answer any you might have. Each Thursday we'll also have a feature interview with some of the biggest names and most interesting characters in the game. Garry Ringrose coming up later on in the show. If you want to get more from that game, join Heineken Rugby Club, whose members enjoy exclusive rewards like match tickets and more. Visit HeinekenRugbyClub.com and remember to enjoy Heineken responsibly and visit drinkaware.ie on how to do so. Gavan Casey here, and I'm joined in studio by Murray Kinsella of the 42.ie. How are you, Murray?
I'm good, Gavin, thanks.
Good. I'm good as well, thank you. Yeah, and we're also joined by Andy Dunne. We've essentially colonised at this stage the fourth consecutive week that you're here, Andy, and it's great to have you. How are you?
It's great to be here.
Okay.
Enthusiastic.
Yeah.
It was a big weekend.
Right, so before the accusations of bias and hating one of the four provinces, or all of them, as it tends to be sometimes, we're going to go in chronological order today. So we can't be accused of anything. That's fair, I think. We're gonna kick off
chronological, but start with Leinster, or
we're gonna start with Munster away to Gloucester. But firstly, let's look back on what was I think their best performance of the season, probably the most complete performance of the season. Anyway, the first thing I want to ask you is, Murray, in your expert opinion, what was it that kind of came together for them that hasn't been coming together, I suppose, throughout the season so far?
Well, they secured a bonus point. Obviously, that's the big talking point out of it, and how their attack functioned. There were obviously several elements to it. The maul was really excellent. The forwards gave a really good platform there. Their kicking was really smart. They put themselves into good positions and pressured the Connacht line out deep in Connacht's half, as well as actually kicking down the tram lines and forcing Connacht into touch a couple of times. Before Peter O'Mahony's try, that happened. Alex Wooten puts the ball down the 15 metre. They force Caolan Blade in. And then just before Joey Carberry's try, something similar, Blayendal hits him. We'll talk about that 10-15 link, maybe a little bit more. But Carberry puts it down the left-hand tram line again, and they force Matt Healy into touch. They score from that 5 metre line out. So really smart in that aspect of it. And also when they were on the ball, actually their handling and stuff, the skill level was really good. And on top of that, like, Carberry has deservedly got plenty of credit for his performance, but I thought guys around him made it a lot easier for him. And I think the Peter O'Mahony try in the first half is a really good example of that, because Chris Farrell makes a good carry in midfield. Carberry's actually on the far side of the ruck. He's coming around the corner, and while that's happening, Earls and Conway on the other side of the ruck are organising themselves. There's a bit of chat. You can see it on one of the replay angles. And it's a simple bit of movement. Andrew Conway running a really good front door line to the inside shoulder of Caolan Blade, and Earls out the back door. Just a little bit of a different picture for the Connacht defence, and it worked really well. So therefore, Carberry comes around the corner. That bit of shape is organised outside him, and then he gets to use his really good decision-making skills, draws up Jack Carthy, really fluent pass out the back, and they finish the try really well. So those kind of things were really impressive, and I think it's just great to see that Earls increasingly, particularly him coming off his wing and making those decisions, is a really good development for them in attack. And even if Conway is back on the wing, he was really good at fullback, I felt. But even if he's back on the wing, you'd love to see a bit more of that from Munster. So definitely encouraging signs in all those aspects.
Yeah, Andy, we've been waiting for it for quite a while, and we've probably bemoaned it as well ourselves, just that maybe things weren't as fluid as they might be. Maybe they were struggling with their identity a little bit. But whether it was the introduction of Farrell or whether it was just a case of things clicking finally, they looked fairly well oiled.
They did, yeah. And I thought their variation was probably one of the key things. They didn't pigeonhole themselves into saying we're going to play an attacking handling game, we're going to play a territorial kicking game. They did a bit of both. They did very well. Then finally, I think, as Murray mentioned, their energy levels, like their work rate off the ball, away from the action area, 40-50 metres away from where the action is at and where the camera is focused. Guys are getting into positions early. They're getting into positions that have a lot of width, which then ask questions of the Connacht defenders who are off the ball. Are they going to mark up those guys, or are they going to stay narrow? And when you add in the likes of Earls, who as a winger who's in the autumn/winter of his career, would say, I do remember Dennis Hickey having a very similar kind of evolution. His transition from being a great finisher and young fast winger to being a mature guy who moves from the wing more into midfield to get involved and take on responsibility. Towards the tail end of Dennis's career, you couldn't get him out of first receiver, maybe because he'd lost a yard of pace, but that's probably unfair. But I think Keith Earls is really taking on that role, and it's brilliant for the likes of Carberry as a young 10 who is also developing, albeit super talented, to get guys out wide taking on responsibility and decision making and work rate. That adds huge value to the attack, and that's why I think it looked very fluent.
And we've spoken about it. You've spoken about, Andy, about them kind of discovering their identity as a team, and potentially that is it. Obviously Carberry is going to grow in terms of his confidence in that decision making as he matures. He's a young out half, but it doesn't necessarily have to be him. It can be other playmakers in the backline that make life easier for him.
And that's part of we harp on about that identity. It all sounds very American. It's Munster rugby, and they're not going to love those type of comments, I suppose. But that's what it is. I mean, the idea that they have a structure where Joey runs everything is not smart. It's not his personality, but it's also different to the history of how they've run things. They've generally run things through a hierarchy, through a big, well-established leader and a 10 like O'Gara. So now that's going to be different with Ronan or with Joey. And if that's the case, the wider guys like Earls coming in and sharing responsibility, diluting the role of Joey's decision making to a point is probably very effective.
It's going to be really interesting this Friday evening in Gloucester, in Kingsholm, whether that clear development and that clear encouraging performance develops again. There's still bits in it. I'm thinking of the Dan Goggin try, like a really nice try. Again, Earls is really influential, cutting back in against the grain underneath the ruck. You're seeing a lot of guys do that now and kind of picking off switched off defenders on that side. But even when they go through, he offloads Farrell, offload to Wooten, and then in behind the line, it's happened a couple of times now where they kind of run away from their support. So there's probably still that, I don't know, it's probably a horrible position to be in behind the line when you make a line break and you're like, what am I going to do next?
Yeah.
But I think with the little bit of extra confidence they've built from the last 2 weeks, I was down there on Monday at the press conference, and obviously there's a high energy in any professional rugby environment, but it was really positive, much more so than when we'd been down earlier in the season. Suddenly there's that confidence in people's steps, even the way they're talking about the game. Peter O'Mahony smiling in press conferences.
We've never seen
crazy
it before.
Peter O'Mahony smiling.
Yes, crazy.
We've never seen the like of it.
So yeah, it just feels like there's a little bit of a weight kind of lifted there, and there's a confidence in it, and that just floods into everything. The set piece stuff hasn't really clicked just yet, but potentially that's the next element of it now that the players themselves believe a little bit more in what they're doing, and then in behind the line maybe taking those chances a little bit better. They did finish it well, in fairness. Byrne makes a good run after Conway makes a good clear out. His work off the ball, as you mentioned, was brilliant, and then a lovely decision from Mathewson. So there's plenty there to be encouraged by, but still I think this weekend will tell a truer tale of it.
Yeah, well, he made a massive impact at the weekend and was a doubt for Gloucester, but Chris Farrell starts for Munster. It's a big boost, Murray.
He was a major doubt. Munster played this one pretty well. Johan van Grant seemed very crestfallen there Monday talking about it, and all the word was that he was going to be set for another spell on the sidelines. Fantastic news for him, first of all. So happy for the guy. It's been a horrible time for him with injuries, and his career, indeed, especially early on, was really stunted by injuries as well. So great to see that he's been cleared, and it does mean that we can get a better sense of Munster's attacking continuity, building on what we saw last weekend, what we've just mentioned, and in terms of what he gives them both physically and in being a bit of a kind of playmaker and distributor as well. Even his organisation against Connacht, you could see him in behind some of the forwards at times, just putting a bit of shape on the attack and communicating well with other guys. So that's a huge boost for Munster. Unfortunately, Chris Clute is going to miss out with his neck injury, but Tommy O'Donnell was really good, I thought, last weekend. So certainly a big positive in the midfield. Yeah,
for sure. Before we kind of look any further into that fixture in Kingsholm, a question here from actually the standard of questions again, extraordinarily high this week, Murray.
Superb.
We've had a look through them.
There was one about, are you wearing a cardigan?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forgot about that one. Who asked that? Joe 90.
You do have a trademark cardigan.
It turns out that restraining orders don't apply to Instagram. By the time you listen to this, Joe, I suppose you'll be in guard of custody, but thanks for tuning in nonetheless. Question here from Jaglin White. He asks, Munster's centres, who the hell do you choose? Just how good is Dan Goggin at the moment? I mean, you touch upon him there, Murray, and a fine finish by him at the weekend.
Yeah, he had a really good performance. He's nice and direct and powerful through the tackle. I think he's, again, probably still learning at this highest level. You even think of his pass against Leinster. You don't want to focus too much on one moment, but playing off a scrum and it's a forward pass into touch. Those kind of moments are probably something that he still has left to improve on. But physically, there's no doubt that he's up to the task. I think earlier in the season of him absolutely boshing Dan Levy into the ground, and not many people do that. So he's clearly got that athletic edge to play at the very top level. And again, he's growing in confidence every time he takes to the pitch. In terms of who you choose, if everyone's fit, I think Scanlon, Farrell, Chris Farrell are the pretty clear first choice, I would say. But I think they're the two obvious ones. I think Scanlon and Chris Farrell. But Goggin has really stepped up the pecking order. Like last season, Sammy Arnold would have definitely been a shoe-in for next in line at 13, but Goggin's asked a big question of that.
Yeah, I agree with Murray. I think their best combination is the Scannell-Farrell combination because they're different, and by being different are even more complementary. I think Scannell is a more probably old school traditional type 12 who can distribute, who can be a game manager, and obviously has a really nice cultured left boot, and those variations in a game are really helpful. And particularly, again, you look at their combinations. As a coach, you're probably going to look at huge experience and talent in Murray, huge talent in Carberry, probably less explosive talent in the likes of Scannell, but a capacity to dial things down and control things and play territory if needs be, or be a distributor, or be a second out half in the back line.
Played a lot of 10 in school.
Exactly.
When we were growing up, he was always a fly half.
And I think it's really a lot of teams have gone that way in recent years, and probably the Aussies would have done a lot of it with Gitto and with and more recently with Bernard Foley, and then the English are doing it with Farrell and
with Ford and Farrell.
Name escaped me. Yeah. So yeah, that I think those two kind of out half players in midfield really does help with your distribution and your attack and your game management. And then Farrell being a lovely foil to that as well, who's so physical and aggressive. When Farrell and Goggin play together, it's a little same in the sense really direct, really aggressive, really physically confrontational, and a real question mark for defences. But in a tough game, in a European game, defences are able to manage that. They're just able, what you want is to ask a couple of questions as opposed to the same question relentlessly. Yeah,
we'll get your predictions at the end of the show as per usual. Before we move on to Leinster, though, Murray, you touched upon it there, that Munster kind of have a spring in their step. Gloucester, I suppose, by contrast, they've lost 3 of their last 5. They've lost their last 2. One of them was 30-15 at home to Sale, and I think there was something like 30-16 away to Leicester. It looks like Cipriani will be back, which will make a difference to them. But certainly, if you were looking at the kind of form team coming into this fixture, it's the away side.
Yeah, it certainly looks that way. I think they've missed Cipriani hugely. He's kind of the player they base everything around, naturally enough, as your 10. But their style of play, they use a lot of kind of those pullback passes, almost rugby league-esque in how they work in phase play. And he's possibly one of the best in the world at those passes. He's extremely good at disguising his intentions. His body language never really gives the really clear cue that a defender needs either to shoot or to sit down the front door. It's really hard to read until the last second, and it seems so simple. One guy running that decoy line essentially up the front and a back out the back for him to pull that backdoor pass to. He does it really well, and he often does it off another pullback pass from one of his forwards, so there's an extra layer of subtlety. And while we're watching from that nice angle where we can go, it's clear where it's going. When you're down pitch level in that kind of, I remember Ian Keeley talking about it as in when you zoom in on the PlayStation when you're playing a car racing game and you're in the car, and suddenly really hard. Same with decision making in attack and defence. and his subtlety there is really important for them. They score some brilliant tries. Another guy, Ollie Thorley, who I think is facing a fitness test just this morning, he has been in sensational form for them in the Premiership. He is so quick. It's disgustingly fast, just how quick he can run. So he's another one to watch out for if he is fit. But I think just that lack of fluency they have, based on Cipriani being out, now coming back in and trying to take control of that structure, does give Munster a little bit of an advantage. There are obviously a few other familiar faces in Gerbrand Grobler there. Johan van Gaal know the likes of Franco Mostert in the second row as well, who's been impressive for them. So there's a bit of familiarity there, but I would agree with you that Munster's momentum is a really nice advantage coming into this.
Now, Murray, your interview this week is with none other than Garry Ringrose.
Yeah, I popped over to PwC in Dublin. He was announcing his renewal of his partnership with them. But interesting to catch up with him. I mean, if you're talking about the best outside centres in the world, he's definitely in that conversation now. So just got some thoughts from him about defending at 13, also improvement of his kicking game, and also that kind of familiar running style of his that we've seen quite a bit in the last few years. So have you always been a 13?
No. In school I played scrum half until I was in 5th year in school, and then had a bit of a growth spurt, and a coach, Justin Vanstone, who actually coaches in Blackrock, the senior team at the moment, suggested I tried fullback out for a year, and then played fullback till kind of October of 6th year, and then there was a centre there at the time who got injured and filled in at 13 there, and yeah, that was that then, and settled in at 13.
Yeah. Obviously, years of progress since then. How do you, or what are the important things for you now as a 13 that you assess when you're looking at your individual performance, say that went well?
There's a long enough list. I think you'd start probably maybe with, well, you could start with defensively. You'd look at your positioning, your work rate away from the ball. I think at 13 you can, obviously it's important directly when it's in front of you making the right decisions, but I think there's also importance on the defensive line away from the ball, and how you manipulate your defensive line to be ready for the next maybe second or third phase away that'll be coming. So there's an emphasis on that, and then obviously there's the obvious on the actual tackle area itself. You can't really afford to miss tackles in the channel, because then they're just the 13 channel, they get in behind you more often than not and can be detrimental. So to be then after maybe assessing that, you look at your individual tackle area, tackle entry, potential reads you might have made, whether there was the right or wrong decision, and usually try and, even if it's the wrong decision, there's probably something that kind of triggered, like whether you'd seen something or tried to overread. There's usually a reason why one makes a decision, and then kind of looking back and not being maybe too tough, saying, okay, well, you can understand why I made that decision, just got it wrong, or missed the tackle. So there's kind of different levels of assessing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But people talk about it as the hardest position to defend on the pitch, which probably still rings true. Wings, it's a tough life now as well.
Yeah, well,
do you enjoy that responsibility?
I don't know I wouldn't necessarily personally call it the hardest, because there's times I find myself in and around the ruck, maybe in the first, second or third, which you say traditionally the front five would be there, and I find that tough because it's just not what you're used to. So I think maybe it's just, if you're out there, it's not what you're used to. If what players might be used to is why it might be particularly tough. But I think every position has a really important role in the whole defensive line. That if the 13's narrow, you might have to be narrow, because in and around the ruck, maybe the forwards, traditionally the forwards being around there, might be doing something wrong that has a knock-on effect on your positioning. Similarly, you could be doing something wrong that has a knock-on effect on them. So I certainly wouldn't see it as the most important. I think everything's sort of interdependent on, I mean, there's different ways the wingers can defend high, which as a 13 gives you a bit more security, because you can see them in your eye line and you might back yourself a bit more to go, and so equally they could be a bit off, which might kind of change your decision making process in the moment. So I'd see it as, I wouldn't see it as the most important position personally myself. I think it's reliant on the guys around you, especially stating the obvious, for a 13 or 12 as well makes a big difference as well. Yeah,
if in doubt, just blame the forwards.
Yeah, exactly.
How much like, obviously you always had that, it always looked like a natural ability for you to read. And technically, how much over the last couple of years pushing on to the highest level of the game, has that been a big focus in terms of around the tackle?
Yeah, again, around the ability to read, I think I wouldn't necessarily say I have a natural ability to read that I just did anyway. I think it's as a result of learning off other players that I've been lucky enough to play with, still playing with at the moment. Maybe other games, watching other games and seeing what players do, and it's not necessarily just the 13, it can be any of the backs. And ultimately getting it wrong as well, because I would get it wrong in training sessions, but then that's how you learn best, really. I think if you push yourself out of your comfort zone and get it wrong, you kind of know whether to do that or not do it again, or what you could do differently. And then obviously technically it can vary based on the opposition you're coming up against, and maybe how they play, whether they have a right or left arm handoff, whether they carry the ball in right or left hand, whether they have the traditional Fijian fend. It can vary. So I think each week you're throwing a different challenge because you're kind of defending as a 13. Like any backs you could be coming against, either their wingers, they're 12 or 13, or fullback in a one-on-one. So you kind of have to be prepared for. Each of them would be slightly different, that sort of way. So you'd have to be ready and adapt slightly to each of the players. Okay.
One of the things that's really stood out probably over the last 2 years is your grubber kicking as well, which maybe when you're younger wasn't quite to the fore. Has that been something that someone encouraged you on, or just you getting the confidence to read that space, or what's that been?
I think it's a tricky. I think it's just something that I think any good back, it's good to have that in the locker, because I think defences are getting so good now. There's a time and a place when it's necessary to do that, to maybe relieve pressure or take pressure off the 10, or just put the opposition under pressure, or relieve your own team from pressure. So there's a million different reasons as to why you do it. But I don't know whether it would be encouraged just to make the right decision at the right time. It would never be like you should kick loads or don't kick loads, or you just kind of in the moment you'd assess whether it's the right decision, whether they have the backfield covered, and if they do, you'd only be kicking it straight to their fullback. But if you manage to manipulate their defence a bit, that there is space there, it might be the best decision to just take it. So I think it's being challenged to recognise that. So I think every player, I think all backs are challenged through in Ireland camp and with Leinster to be able to do that, that sort of way, if it's needed.
Is it a tricky skill, like even the one against New Zealand where you just get it on the touchline, then Robin, I can't remember, his Earls, you smash him into touch? Is it tricky to get that balance on it when you're moving?
Well, I've got it wrong a fair few times as well. I know against was it Exeter, we turned over the ball and it was in the Aviva, pretty much not too dissimilar area of the field, and I walloped it into touch, and it was the wrong thing to do. But then against New Zealand, did a similar kick, and it managed to sit up nicely, and it was the right thing to do. So it can vary. I don't know, you just got to back yourself and try and do it. You can practice it, definitely, and I think all centres and wingers definitely practice it. So when the time comes, it's not the first time you're doing it. So there would be that emphasis, and it's something easy for 5 minutes before training, 5 minutes after training. You can just hit 20 balls, usually with the partner opposites, just kicking them back to each other. So it's pretty easy to do. And then it can prove helpful in the game if you're able to execute on it.
Yeah, just the last one I want to ask you about in terms of attack. Your kind of running style has become quite familiar to fans now. I'm thinking of that Connacht try, even where you're kind of arcing back. Are there certain little cues you're looking for there? Are you just kind of wandering across the pitch, or what's going through your mind as you make a run like that?
I don't know. It's because it is. I've made one or two breaks, just coincidentally is a similar type run. I think it just happens to spur of the moment sometimes when the defence comes up one side, just as you're getting the ball, you kind of in the snap, like the last picture you've taken, you don't physically count the defenders, but you have an appreciation that there's loads of numbers there. So maybe just the odd time you think there's loads there, which means there mightn't be as much the other way, so you kind of just turn back, and it can happen that if they defend really well and come up both sides, you get smashed 5 metres behind the gain line, and it was the wrong thing to do. But then the odd time it works out, which luckily enough it has. But it wouldn't be a tactic, or you wouldn't overthink it. Kind of just happens in the moment, really. And I think I've been lucky once or twice with even that one against Connacht. I think Tig managed to, he didn't block anyone, so it wasn't illegal, but he managed to just get my way a little bit, which created a little hole. So yeah,
that's when the forwards come in useful.
Yeah.
Listen, thanks for chatting to us. Really
no
appreciate
worries.
it.
Thanks very much.
Great to catch up with Garry Ringrose. So on his team then, this I think in terms of Heineken Champions Cup fixtures, certainly in the pool stage, it doesn't get much bigger or much more enticing or feverishly anticipated than this one. The reigning champions against the old aristocrats, 8 European Cups between them. Toulouse are in a serious run of form. 12 games unbeaten, 11 wins, 1 draw. And it could have been so different for them. If you go back to the end of September, they lost 66-15 to Montpellier. Then they lost at home to Cast. They ended that kind of poor run with a fairly rudimentary 10-0 win over Agen. And then they go down to the Wreck, and that debacle with Freddie Burns happens. And that seems to kind of kickstart not only their European campaign, but a really good run of form domestically as well.
Yeah, it's been a thrill to watch for me personally, I have to say. We spoke about it kind of briefly in a show a couple of weeks ago, just the revival of Toulouse and the excitement that's adding. And it's interesting, at the very outset of this campaign, you would have looked at this fixture and been like, oh, it won't be that big a game. But now it's just, as you say, it's potentially a European classic, and they're coming with so much confidence and belief in the style of rugby they're playing. It's been really interesting that they're kind of gone back to almost classical Toulouse traits, but it's in a slightly more structured way, as it tends to be in modern rugby. Everything is based around their kind of transitional phases from defence or kick return and going into their attack there, and having so much energy in that aspect of the game. And the crop of players they have is so suited to that style of play. The fact that it's based on a massive crop of homegrown players coming through again in the likes of Thomas Ramos and Ntamak at 10 or 12, and a host of others. They've 7 in the French squad again now, and that looks like more like a French squad that we recognise. There's always been a Toulouse kind of core to it. The fact that a lot of those guys are young as well is really encouraging. On top of that, they also have that bit of experience. Like Uge and Maydard have been brilliant. Like they've rolled back.
Maydard made that tackle on Burns.
Exactly.
That saving tackle, which kind of kickstarted the whole thing.
Superb against Leinster as well. Yeah. So they've got that bit of core of experience. Even a guy like Maxime Mermoz, who's not playing a lot of games, but he's come home. He's a Toulouse boy as well, and come back at tail end of his career and adding that little bit of experience to the squad. So they've been clever in how they've put it together. We spoke about them getting Reggie Sonez in as well, and he's been a really kind of key influence. He has that, he's a kind of epitome of that Toulouse spirit, just in terms of his approach to life, about enjoying himself and taking punts on things and a bit of risk as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure to watch. I can't wait to see how they perform away at a packed out RDS against the reigning champions as well, and the fact that they got that win at home will give them a lot of belief in going into this game, particularly with it looks like Johnny Sexton out as well. Yeah,
on the flip side of Sexton, we'll touch upon that again in a moment, but just to kind of sum up what Toulouse are doing at the moment in terms of rolling back the years. Andy, like Thomas Ramos is the top scorer in the competition, but he's only 5th in penalties kicked, which kind of he's the top conversion kicker, but like it kind of shows the approach that they're taking to the tournament, really. Yeah, well, like, just straight on the record, like, I love Toulouse. I've little love hearts in my eyes watching them on TV. I've always, and I had researched into it in recent times. They didn't win a French championship from 1947 to 1985, so they weren't always brilliant. But they kind of their soul started to emerge when they brought in Pierre Villepreux, who was French legend, and he got a Hall of Fame award this year, or 2018, from World Rugby. And when they awarded him his Hall of Fame, and it was probably a mix of how he played and how he coached, they said his coaching creed was flexibility and adaptability, but not organisation. And that was kind of on the record as why he was getting this Hall of Fame award. So he took over in the 80s, and so the kind of Toulouse and French rugby style that we're all so familiar with started to really come to the fore. And Toulouse won a championship in 85 and continued on from there, and so did French rugby. And the likes of Villepreux then got a back-to-back Grand Slam with France in 1997 and 1998, and nobody has done that in the professional era except France. Well, what happened was
they started to move away from it. They started to normalise, whether the multi-millionaire owners of the French clubs were trying to, they tried to increase the size of their playing roster on the cheap, and they paid buttons to get Pacific Islanders in who, there's loopholes. The game became very physical and lost its subtlety. They moved away from generating young French talent to come through, and they had marquee players from New Zealand, and all of that started to happen. Now, in recent 18 months, they've started to reverse that and buck the trend, and I don't think it's any accident that the likes of Toulouse are reaping the rewards. And going back to the philosophy of Pierre Villepre, bringing in a guy like Reggie Son, who's a romantic, who's a philosopher, who's embracing all the things that they're very historically attuned with, is shown in their play. And while there are intangibles to that and it's all very flowery and nice, they're really, really physical and really effective with it. So that's where my love affair is with Toulouse. I think it makes for this incredibly interesting game that's going to happen on at lunchtime on Saturday, because if there's a team who can imitate or better Toulouse, it's probably Leinster, given the style they've played with and the physicality they've showed, but the style they've won with in the recent 10 to 15 years at key moments. It's been with a kind of a swagger in their attack as well. So I think it's going to be a pretty special game of rugby, yeah.
Villepre is such an interesting figure in the history of rugby.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like, a lot of the literature based around him is obviously in French, so it's tricky for us to get a deep understanding. But the number of coaches who cite him as a major reference, that kind of general movement approach, as you say, and it sounds like such a simple concept, but playing what you see and reacting to the changing pictures in front of you.
It goes back to that Ian Keatley reference you made when you sit in the tiny little cockpit of a race car. It's a lot harder than, looking at it from afar, but when it's done well, it looks so simple. But like the likes of Cipriani being able to disguise things and engage a defender in front of him, similarly make, if a runner runs a line as a threat and the decoy does his job properly, it's almost impossible for one guy to defend those two things. The problem is it's done very lazily. It's done as like we're gonna imitate that badly, and defenders drift off it. But when it's done really well, it's impossible to defend, and it gives flexibility in your game to attack, and that's exactly what Toulouse have done for a number of years. You know, it's attack done well, but with great simplicity. They
all look so calm when they're in possession. It's like you mentioned, sometimes it's done lazily, sometimes it's done too rigidly. Players are so uptight. Oh my God, I have to be in the right place here. You see someone like Romain Ntamack coming through now. He's so loose and languid in his possession. And also, they're a team who always have the ball in two hands. All these young guys coming through now, it's always back into two hands. Use your fend, get it back into two hands. And it's so fluid and fluent. And I think it's just brilliant, because rugby, because everything's professionalised so much, sometimes you're worried that it's just getting so homogenous. Everyone's playing the same thing.
Totally
everyone
true.
wants to do the same move. Everyone wants to have the same structure. And I think while they do have the physicality and they obviously have to have set piece, I think it's just fantastic that there is a different belief system, a different approach. That's why I love, like, I lived in France for a year. I just love it over there, because though it's so close to home, they think about things differently.
Sure. Their
philosophy in life, as you mentioned with Reggie Son, is different. And I think you can see that in this Toulouse team. So it's really exciting, and I hope that they stay in contention throughout this season.
We were chatting about the I was chatting to a mate. He's actually a boxer. He's competing for the Irish National Heavyweight Championship in a couple of weeks in the National Stadium. Tony Brown is his name, and he was. It was really interesting, because the crossover between sports so often is something you mentioned, the fluidity of movement, the relaxation that they appear to have. He said, like, he said he's really trying, and it doesn't come naturally, to model his style on Cuban boxers. And if you watch them, their shoulders are relaxed, their hips are relaxed, but when they punch, and it's a sucker punch, and it hits you hard. There's an element of, you mentioned the word, things being homogenized in professional sport. You see these guys who are very muscular, who look quite stiff and rigid, who can run into a brick wall all day long, but they don't give you any semblance of being relaxed physically, no fluidity in movement. And the same goes for mixed martial arts, the same goes for great footballers, hurlers, cricketers, golfers. The guys who look the most relaxed are generally the guys who pack the biggest punch. So yeah, I mean, it's brilliant to see that coming back into the game through Toulouse. lose. So.
There's a thing about sports in which you use your arms, where if you are overthinking things or if you're kind of panicky or uptight, your muscles are more tense and therefore you're less likely to actually perform. It's a massive part of why golfers lose their swing, for example. You could have the best swing in the world and then the next week or a couple of months later you're 144th in the world. It's just a huge aspect of it is mental. Like Tony Brown, who you mentioned there, will know that more than most. If you're going into a boxing ring and you're kind of uptight, you're probably going to get sparked and you're probably not going to land any shots. And definitely Toulouse are playing with a kind of I don't know, joie de vivre, is that a term? You'll know it, Murray. I did German, so
no, you nailed it. You nailed it there, yeah.
But and it's enjoying yourself it can make so much of a difference. You said it there, seven players in the French squad this year. There was one Toulouse player in the French squad last year for the Six Nations, so a coming force. Now the Leinster fans at home listening would be like, well, what about us? And no, in fairness, you did refer to them there, Andy, and it is I suppose, like, even if we're to look at what Toulouse are doing, they are, in one sense, replicating what Leinster have been doing and what we've been amazed by, in that they're bringing through players that are extremely young. You mentioned Roman Entimac, who's 19 years old. They have a prop forward there who's 19 as well. His name escapes me now. But we do have a question here from Don Connolly, and it's about Leinster at 10 this weekend. And with Sexton out, he asks, can Ross Byrne fill his boots?
I think the evidence of Ross Byrne stepping into big fixtures in the last year or so would suggest that yes, he can do it. You think back to those Montpellier games last season, and he did really well there. Munster in the semi-final in the Pro 14 did really well there, and has probably been frustrated that he's not gotten more opportunities in those bigger fixtures as well. It's been interesting the last couple of weeks, obviously, that Kieran Frawley has got quite a lot of exposure. I think last weekend was based around the doubts over Johnny Sexton's calf, so they probably decided to pull him from that game, and it was great for Kieran Frawley to get more exposure. He did really well, and also rebounded from that intercept error. I thought his passing game was really kind of brave. He was square to the line, going at the line and making really good decisions. But I think Ross Byrne, in terms of how he manages the team, has really grown. I think the biggest development in his game has been around his passing, his like talk about fluidity, his fluidity in attack and making those decisions on the ball, allowing guys outside him to be in good positions. So I think he's been really impressive over the last 2 seasons. His kicking obviously is a strength, and also you've probably seen him develop that I guess fiery confidence that out-halves need to boss their teams. I remember early game this season and he gave an earful to Scott Fardy, who looked very surprised to kind of get it, thought about answering him back, but goes, all right, that's my out-half, that's his job. So yeah, I think he's really grown into it and he'll be massively eager for this challenge. The interesting one, I guess, is 12 outside. Robbie Henshaw is back in training now, and we've seen him make these startling returns. You think of the Scarlets match last season when he came back from shoulder reconstruction and absolutely dominated physically. This time he's coming back from a hamstring. Potentially you want to be careful with that, so you don't know if Leinster are going to rush him back in, but I think having a slightly unsettled 10-12 combination is a little bit of a disadvantage for Leinster, as well as losing James Lowe to that suspension out in the wing. So there's a big decision to make there. Either Adam Burns, really good form going forward. I think Barry Daly's a good defender. So there are a couple of interesting selections there for Leinster, and certainly I would say overall slightly weakens them.
Yeah, just to touch upon the Ulster game as well, as we said we would do it at the top of the show. It was a fairly straightforward win in the end, but one player to stand out, Andy, well, there was a few, but one of them certainly was Conor O'Brien in the centre for Leinster, who may be in the mix this weekend. Yeah,
and he's taken every single opportunity that's come his way, which is what you need to do when you're Conor O'Brien or the likes of Conor O'Brien, because he's not an established name. He's had to go and play elsewhere. He's probably had to go and find the resilience that maybe guys who get straight into the academy and push through, they don't have to. I mean, they have to turn up and they have to do their job well. But when you don't get that initial push from a young age, or you have to go elsewhere, I think you've got a little ace card in your sleeve, which is just toughness to get to where he got to. He had to carve it out for himself, and then he comes back into the Leinster fold, and then as soon as he gets a shot, what I've seen over the years, I arguably was that protected, cosseted young guy who went through the academy and thought it was my divine right to be involved with Leinster rugby at an 18, 19, 20, and obviously I got found out pretty quick, because that's how sport works. But when I looked around at peers who'd done it the hard way, they were the ones who stuck around for longer periods, who didn't get selected initially because they just had that drive to show everyone and prove people wrong. And I think he's got that in spades. And I mean, apart from that's all very non-technical. But I think that's what's driving him and what's seeing him through to take opportunities. And it's nice to see Leinster and any Irish team using guys who haven't come through the very typical structured approach through the academies. We touched on it last week, and I'd love to see more of it, through the club scene as well. But it's been brilliant to see. I don't know how close he is to starting on Saturday.
He's been registered for the squad, so he's in the mix. Certainly, Rory O'Loughlin maybe would be certainly the physically strongest option, and Noel Reid we obviously saw playing Bath, who has a lovely passing range. But potentially in that Bath game where it was very narrow, it didn't really suit him, the amount of collisions. So there are a couple of options there. Obviously Henshaw is the frontline option, and if he's fit and ready to go, then get him in there. I think on Conor Bryan as well, like he's from Mullingar as well. It's always good to see guys come from different pathways. He spent a lot of time playing AIL rugby with Clontarf as well. Good to see that kind of development pathway as well. And as you say, like he would have watched other guys on that under-20s team accelerating on, and you can just see it in his energy on the pitch. He just wants every touch he can get, and as long a touch as he can get every time, as well as making good decisions. So that's really good for Leinster. This game would be a big ask, I think, for him. But having said that, there's the energy and the form and the confidence flowing through him.
Yeah, and even to be registered in the squad is a little bit of a reward, I think, for some fine form when he has grasped the opportunities. Andy, as you mentioned, just briefly before we move on from Leinster, then, if you were to look at the first game between these two teams, and an absolutely thrilling game it was, what do Leinster need to change, or where do you think the game will differ from that fixture in France?
I think they'll just be a little bit more controlled. It was a strange Leinster performance in that, especially they got back into the wing position, and then again it was just lacking that control is something you'd associate with them so much. Having said that, it took a pretty special kind of try from Toulouse, the really good intercept and some lovely offloading which they excel in. I think they'll just attempt to control it a little bit more, keep Toulouse in their own 22 rather than giving them those turnover opportunities on which they thrive. Like kicking loosey to them is literally a guarantee of a score. You saw last weekend against Agen, and a beautiful try. It was Maynard, Ntamak, Uge, ball in two hands, really good work off the ball. And it was interesting that down in Toulouse, I can remember, I think I tweeted out during the game, coming into the final quarter, I'm almost relying on cliches in my head, Leinster are going to pull clear here. And certainly that was the belief within Leinster as well, that they would have them physically in that kind of quarter, but that has not been the case with Toulouse this season. So I think that's been something they've added to their classical, I guess, strengths, and they've been able to outlast a lot of teams, both domestically and even in Europe as well. So that was probably a lesson for Leinster as well, that when they got into that good position, just don't take the foot off the pedal again. They were loose that game. It was a strange kind of performance, particularly after the Wasps win the week before, and the peak they hit there. So mentally probably as well, I think they would have learned a lot. Yeah,
it's only the great teams that create those cliches as well. They're there for a reason. Also, I just love the combination of Maydar, Ntamak, Uge in that move. Like two guys in their 30s on either side of a 19-year-old. Maydar still looking vaguely like a wolf. Like there's something beautiful about it.
And you can just imagine Uge and Maydar down in the Place Capitale with a glass of red, a fag sticking outside their mouth, chatting about how many tries they're going to score.
Ntamak inside playing Fortnite. Yeah, it's beautiful. The big one for Ulster, they're at home at Ravenhill to Racing, and their destiny is in their own hands. This is an absolutely massive game for them. We have spoken in the past on this show about how we didn't expect them to be in this position. They've probably defied our expectations, if not necessarily their own. So what do they need to do in order to get the W this weekend, Murray? It's one of those games where I personally see them winning for some reason, purely on the basis that it's Ravenhill and there's this kind of intangible, I don't know, the home advantage up there on a kind of a must-win game is worth 10 points in my head.
Yeah. Go with your gut feeling.
I've
been reading about that a bit recently, actually. You're always supposed to go with your gut feeling.
I've been saying it to people a lot, but I thought it kind of was just...
Malcolm Gladwell, isn't it? blink.
Yeah, just go with your
whatever's
gut. So
your first
that's going to
instinct.
happen.
It's there for a reason, I guess. Your instinct, right?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. Survival.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Don't get eaten by a lion.
I guess just the last couple of weeks have underlined what we spoke about in the podcast. Really, there's two very different Ulster teams. The team that played the Scarlets twice is clearly much stronger than the very young and I guess inexperienced team that's going to learn a lot from the last few weeks, missing the key guys. Now they're back to full strength, albeit missing Ian Henderson, which is a big blow. And I guess what do they need to do? They need to fill that gap pretty well and pretty muscularly, because his ability to choke tackle, to dominate contact, to be really good in the maul and the line out obviously as well is huge for them, and was in those Scarlets games. I think the front row of O'Sullivan and Moore and Best need to get back to that scrummaging peak they hit in those two games as well, and not giving up the penalties we saw against Connacht, which was a regression probably to what we saw earlier in the season from Ulster scrum. Billy Burns coming back in will be really important for them. I think he's joined top for try assists in this tournament, both with his kicking and his passing. He's been really creative, and he's had a real nice variety in his kind of attacking decision making. And Will Addison as well, getting him on the ball, because he seems to make something happen every time he touches it. He's got great energy, and it's weird that he's a very kind of lateral player. He tends to run towards the touchline virtually every time he has the ball, that kind of little hitch step and burst to the outside of a defender, but it so often creates that really tough decision for someone on the edge or the second last defender, and they often end up biting in, and he'll slip a pass to a teammate into a hole, or else they won't bite in on him, and his pace is really deceptive. So he's a really integral part of it as well. Racing probably have been a little bit more inconsistent this season than last season, albeit adding a new kind of prong to their threats in Russell and Zebo. That combination has been really enjoyable to watch, really instinctive, albeit with a little bit of kind of pattern almost. There's a lot of inside passes. There's a lot of Russell, again, tying in two defenders and slipping Zebo away, but they're working really well in tandem and seem to be great mates off the pitch as well. So it is a fascinating matchup. I would think Ulster still have enough to win at home, and certainly in Jacob Stockdale they have a really lethal finisher as well. He's scored in every game so far. So it's about those guys getting that maul scrum and that kind of stuff right without Ian Henderson, to give Burns, Addison, Stockdale an opportunity to strike.
Yeah. Simon Zebo will be probably looking to prove himself, I think, to onlookers, and particularly one Mr. Schmidt. I think 9 tries and 16 appearances, something like that he has this season. You mentioned there the relationship he's cultivated already with Finn Russell. But like you mentioned cliches earlier, it's one of those where Racing could actually turn up and just kind of go ham on it. Like, but by the same token, if Ulster make a strong start, could you see them kind of getting the job done?
I don't see a Racing capitulation happening if Ulster were to get a good start. I think they've shown a level of toughness in their game that has been absent in a lot of French sides away from home, and right through until obviously being narrow runners up in the tournament last year. I think they showed a level of professionalism and a willingness to embrace going away from home and turning up, which a lot of French sides, which is so hard to fathom at times, just don't seem to go for. Obviously they have a different, the French culture in terms of their top 14 and where they value that relative to Europe I think is slightly different to where there's a clear, in our game, the Pro 14 is a clear second to European competition. It's probably a bit more of a blurred line in France, which may go some way to explaining why they abdicate responsibility away from home at times. And you would have thought with professionalism that had changed, but it hadn't. But the one guys who seem to be booked that a bit are Racing. The likes of Zebo will, I think, endlessly have a point to prove when he plays in Irish rugby, because he's arguably peaking in his career and on the outside looking in and excluded. And probably, there's probably something that hits him in the sense that, a different rule was made for Johnny when he went to the same club, and that's probably tough for him to take. He's a competitor. And but I think Finn Russell is probably one of their key signings for the year. To me, he's the type of 10 that I know our style is different, and Johnny is a different player. But as the game is changing in the last 2 to 3 years, the Finn Russell style seems to be becoming more and more prevalent, and you see that with Burns, with Ulster too. Guys who are probably less controlled and more unpredictable, and break the game up, because that's certainly what seems to be working in terms of an attacking game. And so I think it's going to be, again, a really open, exciting game of rugby. I don't anticipate Ulster are going to change their style. They've been really willing to make mistakes and be creative, and Racing will attack from anywhere at any given chance, and so very unpredictable stuff, but I suspect a brilliant atmosphere, and a quality game, maybe littered with mistakes and turnovers and counterattacks, but that's great stuff to watch.
Like just looking at the pool, like a losing bonus point isn't the worst outcome for Ulster. Obviously you're not going to go in targeting that, but they're 5 points behind Racing. They've Leicester away next weekend, the weekend after this, and Leicester are out of the competition, so you'd expect Ulster probably to finish strongly there, certainly if there's a Champions Cup quarter final on the line. So I think staying really competitive, and really they should be, even looking at the teams on paper, wouldn't be the worst outcome.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those pools where you could see two teams coming out of it, as opposed to Munster's. Maybe that looks a little bit more dodgy on that end. But to move on, we have a couple of questions actually before we wrap up with predictions. And the winner of Behind the Lines number 2 this week has to be Don Connolly, on account of the fact that he's asked a second very good question. Word of Cian Kelleher moving back to Leinster. Can Connacht progress as a feeder team? And Cian McIntyre also asks any thoughts on Cian Kelleher's move back to Leinster, which hasn't actually been confirmed yet, but is going to happen, let's be honest. Any thoughts there, Lance?
I'm not sure how he's phrased. Can Connacht progress as a feeder team, as in if they lose the likes of Cian Kelleher?
I suppose he perceives them to be a feeder team at the moment if they're losing the likes of Kelleher.
Well, they've been fed for a long time. Cian Kelleher came down to them from Leinster, so it's not like Connacht. If Cian Kelleher was from Monivea, or he was from, a local club down in Galway where they're losing him to Leinster, he came from Leinster. Now he's going back. So I think Connacht are doing brilliantly in terms of how they develop their young players. The game is growing. You get 8,000 people last week and a sellout there. When I played in Connacht, that happened once in a pre-World Cup warm-up for South Africa in 2007. They went and won the World Cup, but that was a sellout. You never got close to that, other than a 3,000 to 4,000 crowd. So they're Connacht won't. I certainly don't think they're viewing themselves as a club who loses their best talent now to the bigger provinces. I think what they're doing is they're being very resourceful. The door is open for guys who haven't made it in other provinces to come in and push on, but they're also really smart in terms of how they've developed from their under 16, under 18, under 20s. How many times have they won the Interpro Championship in recent years, like between under 18s and under 20s? I think twice, have they?
Yeah, certainly.
So they're a strong entity within themselves for what they've developed. So I don't think I'd agree with. Well, Don's more asked a question than given a statement.
Yeah,
but,
maybe I've misinterpreted. Like maybe he actually means we should have Don on. Really, does anyone have Don's number?
Just get him on the phone.
But I suppose a feeder club, it's like almost you loan players out to them in order to develop them, and maybe that's what he means with Kelleher, in that he's moved down there and become a potentially big player, and now he's been taken back. Like maybe that's not a sustainable model to his mind. But I don't know if it's...
Yeah, but I mean, Connacht obviously would have preferred to hang on to him, but they certainly have other options in the back three. I know he's in good form at the moment, and certainly he's made a personal decision that he feels suits his career best, which is good to see, because you want a player who's happy with what they're doing and where they're playing their rugby. But I mean, they have Adi Lokun, they have plenty. They have Matt Healy, they've Kyle Godwin's played along the wing this season, so I think they'll be okay. Like the budgeting thing is massive. They're equally funded now by the RFU, and I guess old kind of, I don't know, stereotypes probably are hard to get over. But certainly in the recent past, even Ultan Dillane, like he's re-signed. Word by all accounts, Munster were in for him yet again for a second contract in a row, trying to get him home, as they would see it, to Munster. but he's decided to stay there, and you're seeing a lot of guys do that. They are going to lose players from time to time because they're not competing potentially for a Champions Cup win. But certainly I think it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. They're going to develop a new high performance centre and stadium, and that'll add a lot to their ability to hang on to players and actually attract a couple more players with an even bigger budget. So no, I wouldn't see them as a feeder team. And even Jack Carty as well as re-signed as well. So yeah, I think there's plenty of positives there, as well as the disappointment of losing a guy who's in really good form.
Yeah, Andy Friend kind of rejected the term or a similar term during the week as well. But thank you nonetheless for your question, Don.
Can we talk someday about what high performance centres are? I know they're it's a word that's used so much. It's a big building where you assume everything that goes on in there is of the highest caliber.
I always just assume it's just good equipment, basically.
Oh, good equipment. Okay, as opposed to good people or good ideas.
Good people as
it's
well.
It's of the highest caliber, whatever goes inside those centres.
Yeah, well, it did change the...
There's no medium performance centres there.
Okay, are you keeping tabs in 2019 as to who is in the lead with...
We've given that up.
We're going to go chronologically again. Munster away at Gloucester, starting with yourself, Murray Kinsella.
I think Munster will win narrowly. I think there's enough momentum behind them now, and I think the boost of having Farrell fit as well is just really, really big. So Danny Cipriani back for Gloucester makes a big difference, but I think Munster will get the job done away.
Andy Dunne.
I agree, yeah. I think the inclusion of Farrell there as well is a huge boost for them. It would have been, we wouldn't have batted an eyelid had the knee injury not happened, but it's the joys of a good story arc. Everyone on edge. Will he make it? Won't he make it? Now we're on the edge of our seats to see how he'll do, carrying probably still a bit of a knee injury into that game, and can he be effective? But they are. If Peter O'Mahony is smiling at all, and he's smiling in press conferences, they're on the crest of a wave in terms of confidence, and I see them carrying that through on Friday night.
Leinster at home to Toulouse, Murray Kinsella.
I'm going to go for a Leinster home win. Obviously Johnny Sexton missing is a big factor, or if it's confirmed tomorrow, we can see now that you never quite know until the team is named. But I do think Leinster have enough. Like, you can't forget about the quality of that pack. I think Ross Byrne is more than capable of guiding them home.
Andy Dunne?
Yeah, I think Ross Byrne is very much an unsung hero in recent 18 months for Leinster. He's unflappable. He's got a brilliant capacity to run a game without getting noticed all that well, and that's his job, is to make everyone else look better. Like a good quarterback or like a very good referee, you don't notice them in an 80-minute game and it flows. So I think if he starts, it'll be quite suited to him, and I think it'll be quite suited to Leinster on Saturday, and I think Leinster will win by 10-ish points.
10-ish. That's confidence.
Yeah.
That is confidence. Minus or starting 10, and you still win by 10-ish. Ulster at home to Racing. I'll start with yourself this time, Andy.
I think Ulster will win narrowly. I think it'll be a game that will be thrilling and mistake-ridden and full of counter-attacks and good tries. And I think Ulster in the last 15 minutes, with the help of a really boisterous home crowd, will push through.
Thrills and spills.
Yes, literally.
Yeah. Murray, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't end on a negative note, but I think they'll...
don't then.
I think they will lose. I'm just trying to be honest here. Having said that, I think a losing bonus point, picking that up would be a fine result, and I think they'll win away in Leicester next weekend, and probably get out of that pool. So yeah, I think it'll be a really good game, but I just see Racing having enough to get it done away from home.
Well, you kind of turned your own lemon into lemonade there, in fairness. There was a little caveat. We like that. That is all we've got time for. Connacht, of course, playing Sale as well at home in another table-topping clash. I think we all fancy Connacht to win that one. Thanks a million for tuning in. Thanks a million as well for the great questions. The standard of questions is actually getting better every week. The book winner is Don Connolly. Congratulations, Don. We will be in touch. Enjoy the rugby over the weekend, and we will be back next Thursday. And just a brief reminder that if you want to get more from the game, join Heineken Rugby Club, whose members enjoy exclusive rewards like match tickets and more. Visit HeinekenRugbyClub.com. Remember to enjoy Heineken responsibly and visit drinkaware.ie on how to do so. Till next week, take it easy.